November 7th, 1944, the Hürtgen Forest, Germany. Unteroffizier Klaus Reinhardt crouched behind the reinforced concrete of his MG-42 position, fingers resting on the pistol grip of what Wehrmacht Doctrine called the most devastating infantry weapon ever fielded. 1,200 rounds per minute, the weapon that had stopped Soviet human waves at Kursk, the gun that had turned Omaha Beach into a killing ground. Hitler's buzzsaw. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Through the narrow firing slit, Reinhardt watched an American squad moving through the skeletal trees 200 yards distant. 8 men, moving cautiously but steadily toward the German defensive line. Standard infantry advance. His gunner, Obergefreiter Schmidt, had already positioned the weapon, the belt fed and ready. 1,800 rounds of 7.92mm ammunition stacked in metal cans beside them, enough to sustain fire for 90 seconds of continuous hell. Then Reinhardt heard something that would shatter everything German infantry doctrine had taught him about firepower superiority. The Americans weren't taking cover. They weren't calling for artillery. They were firing as they advanced. 8 separate semi-automatic rifles, each capable of 40 accurate shots per minute, creating a wall of 30 caliber fire that seemed to walk through the forest toward his position. The Garands' distinctive 8-round clips ejecting, reloading, firing again without pause. It wasn't suppressive fire in the German sense, where machine guns forced the enemy to ground. This was precision firepower delivered by every rifleman, continuous and coordinated, while they moved forward. Schmidt's knuckles whitened on the MG-42's grip. Every instinct trained into him since basic said to open fire. 1,200 rounds per minute would cut through those Americans in seconds. But something was different about this advance. These weren't soldiers ducking from cover to cover, waiting for breaks in machine gun fire. These were riflemen who expected their own weapons to suppress the enemy while they attacked. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The morning had begun with the familiar rhythm of defensive preparation. Reinhardt's MG-42 team occupied one of 3 positions, forming a mutually supporting triangle, covering the main approach to the German line. Standard Einheitsmaschinengewehr doctrine, the tactical philosophy that had dominated Wehrmacht infantry thinking since the late 1930s. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. Build your infantry squad around the machine gun. Every rifleman exists to support the gun. Every tactical decision centers on maintaining that devastating rate of fire. The MG-42 itself represented the pinnacle of this philosophy. 11.5 kilograms of stamped steel and precision engineering, firing the same 7.92 by 57mm Mauser cartridge that fed every German rifle. Unlike the American M1919 Browning at 450 rounds per minute, or the British Bren at 500, the MG-42 could sustain 1,200 rounds per minute from its quick-change barrel system. German crews trained endlessly on barrel swaps, 8 seconds to replace overheated metal with fresh components. The weapon could lay down suppressive fire that no infantry could advance through, or so Wehrmacht doctrine insisted. Reinhardt had learned his trade on the Eastern Front, where MG-42 positions had broken Soviet attacks through sheer volume of fire. An entire rifle company pinned by a single gun, reinforced positions weathering human wave assaults because German machine guns could sustain fire longer than Soviet infantry could sustain courage. The Red Army had nicknamed it the Linoleum Ripper for the tearing sound of its cyclic rate. Soviet infantry learned to recognize that sound and drop flat. Survival meant not moving until the gun fell silent. Against the British in Italy, the same patterns held. Bren guns and Lee Enfield rifles couldn't match the sustained firepower of German defensive positions. British infantry took cover when the MG-42 opened up, called for artillery support, waited for the barrage to lift, then advanced while German crews were still recovering. Standard Allied tactics demanded suppression before movement, artillery before advance. Machine guns controlled the battlefield by denying space to the enemy. But these Americans advancing through the Hurtgen forest weren't following those rules. Schmidt whispered urgent questions. Should we fire? Do we wait for them to get closer? Are they trying to draw our fire to reveal our position? Reinhardt held up one hand, eyes fixed on the approaching squad through the firing slit. He needed to understand what he was seeing before committing to engagement. The American rifle was the reason for this strange confidence. The M1 Garand. Reinhardt had read the intelligence reports with skepticism. A semi-automatic rifle issued to every American infantryman, not just squad leaders or specialists. 8 rounds of 30-06 ammunition, gas-operated action, N-block clip feeding system. The reports claimed it gave American soldiers firepower superiority at the individual level. German intelligence had dismissed this as American industrial excess. Why would you need every rifleman to fire semi-automatically when a properly positioned machine gun could deliver superior suppressive fire? The Karabiner 98 Kurz remained the Wehrmacht's standard rifle. 5-round internal magazine, bolt-action operation, proven accurate to 800 meters. German riflemen trained for precision, not volume. The machine gun provided volume. This division of roles had served Germany well across every front. Yet here were 8 Americans, each carrying a weapon that could fire as fast as they could pull the trigger, advancing while firing, treating their rifles as if sustained firepower was their individual responsibility rather than a crew-served weapons domain. The tactical mathematics began to worry Reinhardt. His MG-42 could fire 1,200 rounds per minute, theoretically devastating. But Schmidt couldn't sustain that rate without overheating the barrel within 90 seconds. And during the 8-second barrel change, the gun fell silent. German doctrine called for this gap to be covered by overlapping fields of fire from supporting positions. But those positions couldn't support if they were under fire themselves. Each American Garand could fire 8 rounds, reload in under 2 seconds with a fresh clip, and continue firing without leaving the soldier's shoulder. 40 to 50. Accurate shots per minute per rifleman. 8 riflemen meant 320 to 400 rounds per minute, delivered while advancing. Not random suppressive fire, but aimed shots from men who didn't need to work a bolt between rounds, who didn't break their sight picture to reload. The Americans reached a line of fallen logs 150 yards from the German position. Instead of taking cover behind them, they used the momentary concealment to coordinate fire. Reinhardt heard the distinctive ping of ejecting N-block clips, multiple rifles reloading simultaneously. Then the wall of fire resumed, 30 caliber rounds impacting the concrete around his firing slit, forcing Schmidt back from the weapon. This was the moment. Reinhardt nodded to his gunner. Schmidt gripped the pistol grip, thumbed the safety, and opened fire. The MG-42's report was everything German propaganda promised. That mechanical scream that had terrified Allied infantry across 2 continents, 1,200 rounds per minute chewing through the winter forest, tracers marking the path of destruction, the belt feeding smoothly through the weapon's action. Schmidt traversed the gun left to right across the American position, standard suppressive technique, hosing the area with metal. But the Americans didn't go to ground. Half the squad continued firing while the other half advanced. Coordinated movement, exactly as if they expected their rifles to provide the suppression that machine guns normally delivered. Schmidt elevated his fire, trying to force them down, but they were already moving to new positions. The MG-42's barrel began to glow dully, even through the winter air. Reinhardt watched in growing disbelief as 2 Americans took positions behind separate trees and delivered aimed fire at his bunker, not spraying bullets in the general direction. Aimed fire. One would shoot while the other reloaded, maintaining continuous pressure on the firing slit. The concrete around the opening began to chip and fragment as 30-06 rounds impacted within inches of the aperture. Schmidt pulled back from the gun, fumbling for the spare barrel. The weapon had been firing for only 40 seconds, but the rate of sustained fire had pushed the barrel past its thermal limits. Reinhardt grabbed the carry handle and yanked, the hot metal searing through his glove. Schmidt slid the replacement barrel into place and locked it home. 7 seconds. They were back in action within 7 seconds. But 7 seconds of silence had allowed the American squad to advance 20 yards. The remaining Americans were now close enough that Reinhardt could see their faces through the firing slit. Calm, focused. Not the expression of men pinned down by superior firepower, but of professionals executing a rehearsed tactic. They fired as they moved, using trees for momentary cover, then stepping out to deliver accurate fire before moving again. The volume of incoming rounds never slackened. Schmidt reopened fire. Another sustained burst, another 50 rounds downrange. One American went down, hit in the leg, but his squad didn't break. 2 men grabbed him and pulled him back, while the others increased their rate of fire, covering the withdrawal. The wounded man's Garand lay where he'd dropped it, still loaded, still functional. Another soldier scooped it up without breaking stride, now carrying 2 rifles, doubling his individual firepower. The second barrel change came at 80 seconds. Schmidt's hands moved with practiced efficiency, but Reinhardt could see the strain in his movements. Barrel changes weren't supposed to come this fast. The Doctrine assumed pauses in fire, coordinated suppression with other positions, time for the weapon to cool between engagements. But there was no pause. The Americans weren't giving them time to manage heat build-up. As Schmidt locked the third barrel into place, Reinhardt heard the sound that made his blood cold. The supporting MG-42 position to his left had gone silent. Not the silence of a barrel change, the permanent silence of a position eliminated. Through the firing slit, he could see why. While his team had focused on the Americans directly to their front, another squad had advanced from the flank. Same tactic, walking fire from 8 Garands, continuous pressure, steady advance. The supporting position had tried to engage both threats simultaneously and been overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming rounds. Schmidt's hands shook as he gripped the pistol grip. The American squad to their front was now within 100 yards, close enough that Reinhardt could see the muzzle flashes from individual rifles, close enough that the 30-06 rounds were penetrating the concrete at angles, fragmenting inside the bunker, close enough that the continuous volume of fire had ceased being suppression and become elimination fire. The MG-42's belt ran dry. Schmidt reached for a fresh ammunition can, fingers clumsy with exhaustion and fear. Reinhardt understood what his gunner was feeling. They had the superior weapon. The military science proved it. 1,200 rounds per minute versus 40 per rifle. No contest. Except the science hadn't accounted for 8 rifles firing simultaneously, continuously, while advancing. Hadn't accounted for the psychological impact of facing that much coordinated firepower from weapons that didn't need crew-served positions or supporting troops. The Americans weren't using tactics designed to defeat machine guns. They were using tactics that assumed individual riflemen could deliver sustained fire equivalent to light automatic weapons. Walking fire. The concept had been French back in the First World War. Fire while advancing. Suppress the enemy through continuous volume, rather than waiting for machine gun support. The Doctrine had failed with the Chauchat automatic rifle, too unreliable, too prone to jamming. Failed with the British Lewis gun, too heavy, too awkward. Failed with every weapon that tried to make riflemen into autonomous fire units, except the Americans had made it work. The M1 Garand was reliable enough, accurate enough, and fast enough to turn 8 separate soldiers into a self-sufficient fire team that needed no crew-served weapons to maintain suppressive fire. The semi-automatic action meant no loss of aim between shots. The N-block clip meant 2-second reloads without breaking shoulder contact. The 30-06 cartridge meant hitting power equal to the Mauser round, and American industrial capacity meant every single infantryman carried one. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Schmidt managed to load the fresh belt and began firing again. But his fire was ragged now, short bursts instead of sustained suppression. The barrel was already glowing from the previous engagement and couldn't sustain another full cyclic rate period. The Americans continued their advance, their fire never slackening, their confidence absolute. The third MG-42 position opened fire, trying to relieve pressure on Reinhardt's bunker. For 30 seconds, the combined firepower of two 1,200 round-per-minute guns seemed to slow the American advance. But only seemed. Reinhardt watched through the slit as the Americans simply split their fire between the two positions, 4 Garands suppressing each bunker, maintaining that wall of continuous 30-caliber rounds that made returning fire suicidal. This was the truth German military science had never predicted. Volume of fire mattered, yes, but distributed volume mattered more than concentrated volume when the distributed fire came from reliable weapons operated by trained soldiers. 8 men with Garands could deliver roughly the same sustained firepower as an MG-42, once barrel changes and ammunition management were factored in. But those 8 men were spread across 80 yards of front, creating overlapping fields of fire that no single German position could suppress. And they were mobile, advancing while firing, something no crew-served machine gun could match. Schmidt's gun fell silent again, not from overheating this time. The ammunition cans were empty, 1,800 rounds expended in less than 3 minutes of engagement. Standard load for extended defensive operations, but not for the kind of sustained suppressive fire needed to stop 8 men who could each deliver 40 rounds per minute while advancing. Reinhardt made the decision every German soldier dreaded. He ordered the withdrawal. They abandoned the position, grabbed what equipment they could carry, and pulled back to the second line of defense. Behind them, American soldiers methodically cleared the bunker, their Garands ready, that walking wall of fire never truly ceasing. Reinhardt heard the distinctive ping of another N-block clip ejecting, reloading, continuing the advance. The command post 300 yards behind the front line buzzed with controlled chaos. Major Friedrich Weber studied the tactical maps spread across the wooden table, red markers indicating positions lost, blue arrows showing American advances, 3 machine gun positions overrun in under an hour, not by artillery, not by tanks, by rifle squads employing tactics that Wehrmacht doctrine insisted were impossible. Reinhardt delivered his report with clinical precision, keeping emotion from his voice despite the trembling in his hands. 8 Americans, M1 Garand rifles, walking fire while advancing. Continuous suppressive fire from individual soldiers. His MG-42 team had expended 1,800 rounds and achieved perhaps 2 casualties before being forced to withdraw. Weber listened without interruption, his weathered face betraying nothing. At 43, he'd commanded infantry across Poland, France, and 2 years on the Eastern Front. He'd seen Soviet artillery reduce German positions to rubble. He'd watched Tiger tanks cut through American armor at Kasserine Pass. He understood the mathematics of modern warfare, the brutal calculus of firepower and casualties. But this report challenged everything he understood about infantry combat. "Your weapon was functioning properly?" Weber asked. "Perfectly, Herr Major. 1,200 rounds per minute. Standard barrel changes every 90 seconds. The MG-42 performed exactly as designed. Ammunition? Adequate supplies. We never ran short during the engagement itself. The withdrawal was tactical, not logistical." Weber traced the American advance on the map. Multiple squads, each moving independently but with coordinated timing. While one squad engaged a German position, another would advance from a different angle. The MG-42 teams couldn't shift fire fast enough to suppress multiple threats simultaneously, and every time a German gun fell silent for a barrel change, the Americans advanced another 20 yards. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. "The intelligence reports mentioned this rifle," Weber said, pulling a folder from beneath the maps. "American M1, semi-automatic, 8 rounds, gas-operated. Our analysts concluded it represented typical American industrial excess, more ammunition expended for equivalent results. We assumed our doctrine of concentrated machine gun fire would prove superior. With respect, Herr Major, the analysts were wrong. Weber looked up sharply. Reinhardt met his gaze steadily. Explain. The Americans aren't trying to match our rate of fire with individual rifles. They're creating distributed firepower that we cannot suppress with concentrated positions. 8 men with 40 rounds per minute each gives them over 300 rounds per minute across 80 yards of front. Our single, MG-42, even at 1,200 rounds per minute, can only suppress one narrow sector at a time. While we engage one American, 7 others continue firing and advancing. Weber was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out a different document, this one marked with security classifications. American military training manuals, captured from a supply dump near Aachen 3 weeks earlier. He'd read them with curiosity, not urgency. Now he read them with growing understanding. The Americans called it marching fire or walking fire. The concept dated to French experiments in World War I, attempting to give infantry the ability to advance under their own firepower without waiting for machine gun support. The French Chauchat automatic rifle had been the first attempt. Light enough for one man to carry and fire while walking, high rate of fire to suppress enemy positions. The theory was sound. The execution had been disastrous. The Chauchat jammed constantly, overheated rapidly, and proved too inaccurate for effective suppression. The Americans had tried the same concept with the Browning automatic rifle, better than the Chauchat certainly, but still a specialized weapon issued to select soldiers within each squad. The BAR man became a target, German infantry learning to identify and eliminate the automatic rifleman first. Remove the BAR and the American squad lost its mobile firepower. But the M1 Garand changed everything. It wasn't an automatic rifle. It was a semi-automatic battle rifle issued to every infantryman. The walking fire concept no longer depended on 1 or 2 specialized weapons. Every soldier could deliver sustained fire while advancing, no single target to eliminate, no specialized crew to disrupt. General Patton, Weber read from the captured manual, recommends that riflemen fire every 2 or 3 paces while advancing. The weapon may be held at shoulder height if desired, though a position between belt and armpit is equally effective. The goal is not precision marksmanship, but continuous suppression of enemy positions. Reinhardt nodded. That's exactly what we observed, Herr Major. They weren't aiming for individual kills. They were creating a wall of fire that forced us to keep our heads down, and while we were suppressed, they advanced. By the time we could return fire effectively, they'd closed the distance, and our advantage in cyclic rate no longer mattered. Weber pulled out casualty reports from other sectors. The pattern repeated across the entire Hurtgen front. German machine gun positions that should have held for days were falling within hours. Not to superior tactics or better training, to a fundamental shift in the nature of infantry firepower. The captured American manual included after-action reports from training exercises at Fort Benning, where infantry tactics had been refined throughout the 1920s and 30s. The Americans had studied World War I's stalemate and concluded that infantry needed the ability to advance without constant machine gun support. The M1 Garand was the technological solution that made the tactical vision possible. A trained American rifleman could fire 40 to 50 accurate shots per minute. The Karabiner 98 Kurz, for all its precision and reliability, managed perhaps 15 rounds per minute in skilled hands. Bolt-action operation required the soldier to break his sight picture, work the bolt, reacquire the target. 3 times the cycle time meant 1/3 the sustained fire rate. The mathematics were devastating. An American squad with 8 M1 Garands could deliver 320 to 400 rounds per minute while advancing. A German squad with 9 carabiner rifles and 1 MG-42 could theoretically deliver 1,200 rounds per minute, but only from a fixed position, and only while the machine gun was firing. During barrel changes, the squad's firepower dropped to perhaps 135 rounds per minute from the rifles alone. The Americans had built their infantry tactics around continuous fire rather than burst suppression. They didn't need to achieve 1,200 rounds per minute for short periods. They needed to sustain 300 rounds per minute indefinitely while moving forward, and they'd given every rifleman the weapon to do exactly that. Weber studied the tactical implications. German infantry doctrine since the 1920s had been built around the Einheitsmaschinengewehr concept. The general-purpose machine gun as the squad's center of gravity. Every rifleman trained to support the gun, move the gun, protect the gun, feed the gun ammunition. German squads were mobile machine gun platforms with rifle-armed infantry as supporting elements. This doctrine had proven devastatingly effective against enemies using similar organizational structures. Soviet infantry, with bolt-action Mosin Nagant rifles and DP-28 light machine guns. British infantry, with Lee Enfield rifles and Bren guns. In those matchups, the MG-42's superior rate of fire and quick change barrel gave German infantry a decisive advantage in defensive operations. But American infantry didn't follow the same organizational principles. They'd built their squads around the assumption that every rifleman could deliver sustained fire. The BAR provided additional firepower, yes, but wasn't the squad's sole source of automatic fire. American infantry tactics assumed distributed firepower rather than concentrated machine gun positions. This wasn't just a difference in weapons, it was a difference in philosophy. German doctrine valued precision and efficiency. Train riflemen for accurate single shots. Concentrate automatic fire in specialized crews. Conserve ammunition through disciplined fire control. The approach made sense in a resource-constrained military that couldn't afford to waste ammunition on suppressive fire. American doctrine valued overwhelming material. Application. Give every soldier a weapon capable of sustained fire. Train them to advance while shooting. Accept higher ammunition consumption in exchange for faster tactical tempo. The approach made sense for an industrial power that could produce ammunition faster than its infantry could expend it. Weber had seen American logistics firsthand during the fighting in France. Trucks loaded with ammunition crates, moving forward daily to resupply infantry units. American soldiers carrying 8 to 10 en-block clips, 64 to 80 rounds per man, with more available from company supply points. The logistical infrastructure to support walking fire tactics on a division-wide scale. German infantry, by contrast, carried 60 rounds for their carabiner rifles, and perhaps 300 rounds per MG-42. Resupply came irregularly, often by horse-drawn cart when fuel shortages grounded motor transport. The logistics couldn't support American-style fire discipline. German soldiers learned to conserve ammunition because they might not receive more for days. But logistics alone didn't explain what was happening in the Hurtgen forest. The Americans had created a tactical system where weapon reliability, ammunition supply, training methodology, and infantry doctrine all reinforced each other. The M1 Garand worked reliably in mud, rain, and freezing temperatures. American industry produced the rifle and its ammunition in unlimited quantities. Training emphasized fire volume over individual marksmanship, and doctrine assumed every rifleman could suppress enemy positions without specialized weapons. German infantry, even with superior individual training and better tactical positioning, couldn't overcome that integrated system with machine gun doctrine designed for a different kind of warfare. Reinhardt cleared his throat. "Herr Major, if I may offer an observation." Weber nodded. The Americans we face today weren't elite troops, no special uniforms, no distinctive insignia. They appeared to be standard infantry, possibly replacements given their age, yet they executed walking fire tactics with absolute confidence. This suggests the tactic isn't reserved for specialized units. Every American infantry squad may be trained and equipped to advance under their own fire. The implication was stark. If walking fire was standard American doctrine, German defensive positions across the entire Western Front faced the same problem. MG-42 teams could still inflict casualties, could still suppress individual targets, but couldn't prevent determined American advances when every rifleman carried a weapon that made him equivalent to a light machine gunner. Weber had fought defensive battles across 3 years of war, He understood the psychology of machine gun warfare. The sound of an MG-42 opening fire produced an almost physical reaction in enemy infantry. Soviet soldiers would flatten themselves against the ground at the first burst. British infantry would dive for cover and wait for artillery support. The psychological impact of that 1,200 round per minute scream was as valuable as the actual casualties inflicted. But the Americans in the Hurtgen forest hadn't reacted that way. They'd heard the MG-42 open fire and continued advancing, trusting their own weapons to suppress the German position while they closed the distance. That confidence didn't come from bravery alone. It came from training that taught them their rifles could deliver effective suppressive fire. From experience that proved the tactic worked. From doctrine that placed firepower authority in the hands of every individual soldier rather than concentrating it in crew-served weapons. The captured training manual included a section on countering machine gun positions. American infantry were taught to identify machine gun nests through their sustained fire patterns. Then, rather than calling for artillery or waiting for tank support, squad leaders were encouraged to employ walking fire to suppress the position, while the squad maneuvered for a flanking approach. The manual acknowledged this tactic would result in higher ammunition consumption, but considered it acceptable given American logistical capacity. Higher ammunition consumption. Weber found himself almost laughing at the understatement. An American squad employing walking fire for 5 minutes could expend 1,600 rounds, more than a German squad carried for an entire day of combat. The Americans considered this acceptable because trucks would arrive tomorrow with more ammunition. German logistics couldn't support that level of expenditure on a sustainable basis. But the ammunition issue ran deeper than simple quantities. The M1 Garand used the 30-06 cartridge, the same round that fed American machine guns. Standardization across the entire infantry structure. A soldier could take ammunition from a machine gun position and load it into his Garand, or vice versa. German infantry used 3 different cartridge types, 7.92 by 57mm Mauser for rifles and MG-42 seconds, 9mm Parabellum for submachine guns, and 7.65mm for captured Soviet weapons that had been pressed into service. The logistical complexity of managing multiple ammunition types consumed resources that American standardization avoided. Even the en-bloc clip system, which German intelligence had initially dismissed as unnecessarily complex, proved its value in sustained combat. A German rifleman with a bolt-action carabiner could carry 60 rounds in stripper clips. Loading those rounds required careful manipulation of the stripper clip into the rifle's magazine, thumb pressure to strip the rounds down, then manually cycling the bolt to chamber the first round. Under fire, with cold fingers and adrenaline flooding the system, this process became fumbling and slow. An American rifleman with an M1 Garand carried the 60 rounds in 8 en-bloc clips. When the rifle fired its 8th round, the clip ejected automatically and the bolt locked open. Inserting a fresh clip took one motion, pressing down until the clip locked home and the bolt released to chamber the first round. 2 seconds under ideal conditions, perhaps 4 under fire. The Garand could sustain a higher practical rate of fire because reloading was faster and simpler. Weber walked to the bunker entrance and stared out at the forest where Reinhardt's position had been overrun. American infantry would be consolidating there now, preparing for the next phase of their advance. Their rifles would be cleaned and reloaded, ready for tomorrow's fighting. The M1 Garand's simple gas-operated mechanism meant field maintenance required no specialized tools. A rifleman could disassemble his weapon with just a rifle rod, clean the action, and reassemble it in minutes. The MG-42, for all its devastating firepower, required more extensive maintenance. The quick-change barrel system meant crews needed to carry spare barrels, adding weight to their load. The high rate of fire generated carbon buildup that required regular cleaning to prevent malfunctions. The belt-fed ammunition system, while effective, was more complex than clip or magazine feeding and more prone to issues if the belt became dirty or damaged. Again, the American system showed its integrated nature. Simpler weapons, easier maintenance, more reliable operation. Each element individually might seem like a small advantage. Collectively, they created an infantry force that could sustain operations longer, fight more effectively with less logistical support, and adapt faster to changing battlefield conditions. A young lieutenant entered the command post with fresh reports. More American advances across the entire sector, more German positions withdrawing after brief engagements. The pattern was unmistakable. Wehrmacht defensive doctrine, designed around machine, gun positions and concentrated firepower, was failing against American walking fire tactics. Weber made his decision. He would prepare a detailed report for division headquarters, outlining the tactical problem and recommending doctrine changes. German infantry needed new tactics to counter American firepower advantages, perhaps more widespread use of the Sturmgewehr 44 assault rifle, the selective fire weapon that could match American sustained fire rates, perhaps reorganization of infantry squads to emphasize distributed firepower rather than concentrated machine gun positions. But even as he drafted the report in his mind, Weber understood the fundamental problem. Germany was fighting an industrial war with craftsmanship doctrine. The MG-42 was an excellent weapon, perhaps the finest machine gun ever designed. German infantry were superbly trained, tactically sophisticated, experienced veterans. German defensive positions were well constructed and intelligently sited. None of it mattered when facing an opponent who'd solved the basic problem of infantry firepower through industrial mass production and tactical innovation. The Americans hadn't built a better machine gun. They'd eliminated the need for machine guns to provide squad-level suppressive fire by giving every rifleman a weapon capable of sustained semi-automatic fire. Reinhardt stood at attention, waiting for dismissal. Weber looked at the young Unteroffizier, seeing the exhaustion and confusion in his eyes. A soldier who'd done everything right, followed doctrine perfectly, and still been forced to withdraw from a superior position. "You performed well today," Weber said finally. "The failure wasn't tactical. It was systemic. We're fighting with doctrine designed for a different kind of warfare, against an enemy who's redefined what individual infantrymen can accomplish." "What do we do, Herr Major?" Weber had no answer that would satisfy. "Adapt, yes. Learn, certainly. But adapt to what? Germany couldn't match American industrial production, couldn't replicate their logistical infrastructure, couldn't arm every rifleman with a semi-automatic rifle when factories were already struggling to produce enough carabiner rifles and MG-42 seconds. The walking fire tactics that had shattered Reinhardt's position weren't the result of superior German casualties or tactical mistakes. They were the inevitable outcome of a system where technology, training, logistics, and doctrine all aligned to give ordinary infantrymen extraordinary capability. The M1 Garand was simply the visible weapon. The real advantage was the integrated American approach to infantry warfare. Outside, the sound of distant firing continued. American squads advancing through the forest, their Garands creating that continuous wall of suppressive fire that German machine guns couldn't answer effectively. The buzzsaw scream of the MG-42 would still kill Allied soldiers tomorrow, and the next day, and for all the days remaining in the war. But the myth of machine gun superiority had died today in the Hurtgen forest. Died facing 8 Americans with semi-automatic rifles, who understood that distributed firepower could overcome concentrated machine gun positions, who'd been trained that their individual weapons could suppress enemy positions while they advanced, who carried enough ammunition to sustain that fire because American logistics made it possible. The greatest machine gun ever built had met an opponent it couldn't defeat, not another machine gun, but a rifle, repeated 8 times per squad, integrated into tactics that assumed every soldier could deliver sustained fire, supported by logistics that made unlimited ammunition available, employed by infantry who'd been taught that walking fire was simply standard infantry doctrine. Weber returned to his maps and began planning tomorrow's defense. The MG-42 positions would be sited differently, with better mutual support and more attention to flanking approaches. Ammunition allocations would be increased where possible. Infantry squads would be instructed on American walking fire tactics and taught countermeasures. But he knew, with the certainty of a veteran who'd fought across too many fronts, that tactical adjustments couldn't overcome systemic advantages. Germany was fighting yesterday's infantry war with yesterday's doctrine. The Americans had moved forward, not through wonder weapons or tactical genius, but through industrial capacity and integrated thinking about how infantry should fight. The MG-42 would continue its service, would kill thousands more Allied soldiers before the war's end, would earn its reputation as one of history's finest machine guns. But in the Hurtgen Forest on November 7, 1944, it learned a hard lesson. The future of infantry warfare belonged not to concentrated crew-served weapons, but to reliable rifles in the hands of every soldier. The Americans had armed their infantry with that future, and they were walking through German defensive positions, firing as they advanced, proving that doctrine mattered as much as weapons, that integration mattered as much as individual excellence, and that sometimes the answer to superior firepower was distributed firepower delivered by ordinary soldiers with extraordinary weapons. The spring of 1945 brought Germany's collapse, but the lessons of the Hurtgen Forest had already spread throughout Wehrmacht command structures. Officers who'd survived the winter campaigns shared a common observation in their after-action reports. American infantry firepower had fundamentally changed the nature of defensive warfare. The MG-42 remained a devastating weapon, but its tactical effectiveness had been diminished by an opponent who refused to fight according to European doctrine. Hauptmann Ernst Bauer, formerly of the 352nd Volksgrenadier Division, sat in an American interrogation facility near Remagen in April 1945. His division had fought through the Ardennes offensive, the last desperate German counterattack in the West, then conducted fighting withdrawals across the Rhineland until final surrender. The American intelligence officer conducting the interview wanted to understand German perspectives on American small arms effectiveness. Bauer chose his words carefully, aware that his observations might sound like excuses for defeat. But the American captain seemed genuinely interested in tactical analysis rather than propaganda victories. "Your M1 rifle changed how infantry combat functions," Bauer explained. "We trained our soldiers to recognize machine gun fire and react accordingly. Take cover, identify the gun position, wait for the fire to slacken, then advance or flank. This worked against British infantry with their Bren guns and Lee Enfield rifles. It worked against Soviet infantry with their DP machine guns and Mosin Nagant rifles. But it failed against American infantry because your riflemen provided their own sustained fire." The American captain nodded, making notes. Did German intelligence understand this advantage before combat contact? Intelligence reports mentioned the M1 Garand as early as 1943, after your forces landed in North Africa. But the reports focused on technical specifications. Semi-automatic operation, 8-round capacity, gas-operated mechanism. We understood it was a capable rifle. We did not understand it would enable entirely different infantry tactics. Bauer described the first engagement where his battalion faced American walking fire. December 1944, during the Ardennes offensive's final phases. His men had established defensive positions along a tree line, 3 MG-42 teams covering the approaches across open ground. Standard defensive deployment. When American infantry advanced across that open ground, German machine gunners expected to cut them down as they had cut down so many attacks before. Instead, the Americans advanced in a steady line, firing as they walked. Not aimed fire at individual targets, but continuous fire that forced German gunners to duck below their weapon sights. The MG-42 teams would rise, fire a burst, then drop as American rounds impacted around their positions. By the time the Germans could sustain fire, the Americans had covered 50 yards. Another burst, another withdrawal, and the Americans were at 100 yards. At that range, 8 M1 Garands delivering 40 rounds per minute each created suppressive fire that German machine guns couldn't overcome through rate of fire alone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.